So, as regular listeners to the podcast will know, I grew up with dyslexia in a time that it was very little understood. Felt a lot of my childhood feeling like a complete moron, and it just seemed to take so much longer for me to grasp concepts than those around me. And it didn't help that my identical twin breezed through maths and science at school, so you got that direct comparison just to really rub it in. And it took a couple of teachers who really understood sort of world of neurodiversity and understood what I was going through to restore my confidence in myself and turn things around. My experience is a drop in the water compared to what many millions go through every year. But I thought it'd be useful context, just so you know what I've been through, as we dive headfirst into the fascinating topic of neurodiversity, what that means for the SME workplace, as well as the opportunities that are often missed. Our guest today is Louise Brown, who, as well as having a huge amount of experience with neurodiversity, no spoilers here, Louise, don't worry, we'll go to that in a second. But Louise is also a non-exec director of City HR Association. She sits on the board of the Company of HR Professionals and is a school governor of the Valley Invicta Academies Trust. I think a lot of rich experience in all of those different organisations, as well as your life more generally. Louise, welcome to We Need to Talk About HR.
Thanks for having me, Felix.
So let's start right at the beginning then. So what is it that makes you so passionate about this topic?
So 21 years ago, I met a man who was soon to be my life partner, really, who I ended up marrying, and he has got OCD. And actually, it wasn't until I met him that he probably started to really talk about his neurodiversity and what that kind of meant for him in daily life, but also in his job. And actually, it led him to make various different decisions through his career. And where it's kind of brought him from then to now has always kind of fascinated me. I then, because I have a neurodivergent husband, ended up with two neurodivergent little girls. And actually, unbeknown to me, I also acquired neurodiversity through my actual line. So my mum has got neurodivergency in all of her eldest grandchildren.
Wow.
So through my brother and my sister and me, we all have neurodivergent children, which actually has given us so much joy, but also huge challenge, and watching them face challenges at different points in their life. My eldest niece is now 26, and my youngest baby herself is 5. So we have lots of kind of different ends of the spectrum and different challenges that they're facing all of the time, alongside being married to one. So I'm 75% neurodivergent household, with me being the neurotypical one.
So it's nice that you're the minority.
I certainly am.
Excellent. And I think it's really fascinating. And I think this is why I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, besides you as a professional, because I think that sometimes those personal stories really get lost in the debate, and well, not the debate, but the sort of, as we all explore what it means to have neurodivergent team members in the organisation. So I'm really happy that you're bringing that perspective along today. So we talked. I think it's becoming more and more of a topic that people talk about. Certainly more than when I joined the workforce 15 years ago, something like that. But where do you see neurodiversity, neurodivergence fitting into, I suppose, the relative priorities that small mid-sized companies have, that small mid-sized HR teams have?
I see the trend largely in the larger organisations. So I think there is a greater maturity in bigger organisations, and that could be because of many different things. It could be because they have funding, or it could be a combination of the funding, but also the large populations that they are already dealing with within their workforce. I see actually over the last few years post-COVID that the neurodiversity topic has become somewhat more fluid in organisations. So what I feel has happened post-COVID is that neurodivergence become a much more kind of known thing, because we were going into people's lives during COVID. It was something that couldn't be masked. And as you probably know, with neurodiversity, people mask their neurodivergent behaviours. So actually during COVID, it really opened up that world of neurodiversity to another level. The way I kind of see organisations who are smaller and kind of the medium-sized organisations is you will find kind of senior leaders with neurodiversities like yourself with dyslexia, or somebody who has an experience with somebody with, say, autism or ADHD or something like that. Then it becomes much more of a topic of conversation because they know about it. And the reason why I kind of say that is because it's the awareness piece that really starts to kind of get into the agenda. If there's an awareness, the agenda becomes richer because we know the impact that those different people are having. I don't think we are at the peak of that yet, but what I do see is that now we are kind of seeing the 5 different dimensions of our generations within the workforce. We are now experiencing it on new levels. In the previous kind of generations, our older generations that we have in the workforce, we didn't have the academics, the knowledge that we have today. We didn't have the support that we had today with the NHS and our medical kind of understandings and research. Whereas the generations that are coming through, they absolutely have had that support, albeit, we have various different challenges of people, waiting to get diagnosed and things like that. But organisations like schools have that awareness and therefore can make adaptations, realistic adaptations, and things that really then start to make the workplace suit individuals and not a one size fits all.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think you hit on a couple of topics there that feel like they're really shaping the sort of the debate here. I think you mentioned schools, and I think it brings up a really interesting topic, which is I just feel like more and more people are getting diagnosed, and whereas 20 years ago, the sort of leader of a CEO of an organization like Instant Impact, I wouldn't have ever known. You do the Instant Impact story 20 years ago, I wouldn't have ever known that I was dyslexic. I would have just thought that I struggled at school a bit and then kind of figured it out as I got older, which would mean, as you said, that conversation would never have happened. So I think that's a real opportunity. And I'd love to just explore, once that conversation is happening at the C-level or in HR teams, what are the sort of, I guess, what's next? What are you seeing? How does this, so we're talking about it now, but how do you think the structures and processes and strategies that organizations have to make the most out of their neurodivergent population, how's that going to evolve?
I think it depends on where everyone is in their journeys. So we can talk quite broad brush about neurodiversity and where the direction of travel is going. I think society is pushing for organisations, large and small, to think and consider much more about that talent pool. I think what I would say it's doing in the corporate kind of walls is that it's allowing us to be really inclusive, and actually it's allowing us to increase our ability to tap into talent pools that we never even knew that we could have access to before. We're doing that by really thinking about the processes, the policies, and it sounds very cliche to talk about the really bog standard things of, internal structures and things like that. But it really does come down to that. We've been defining organisationally the structures that work for a neurotypical workforce, but actually it's not as plain sailing as that anymore. We have to think about, the type of organisational structures that are then going to complement those type of skill sets. It's thinking about the different agenda and thinking about the people agenda in a much kind of more diverse way. And I think what is equally really important is about thinking neurodiversity. Actually, you don't have to just think about neurodiversity. If you just think about inclusion as a whole. So it's not just about those people with ADHD or autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia, OCD, all of the different kind of makeups of a neurodivergent person. It's thinking about difference and how businesses really can capitalise on the diverse thinking of people more broadly. And however that manifests, whether it's come from somebody being neurodivergent or whether it's come from somebody's social background, however that has come about, I think what it's doing to us as businesses, it's making us just think differently. It's making us see people differently. We're changing the way we hire people. We're changing the way we think about people's well-being, because we're not just trying to sit there and think, okay, we can do mental health awareness training and that is it. That isn't it. We're taking things that next step, one step further. You have neurodivergent behaviours. You consider things like anxiety or just somebody coming into the workplace, an introverted individual, that could be manifesting in a very different way than somebody who was the extrovert, who was more kind of towards an ADHD kind of personality. Now, I use those really purposefully and intentionally, and that's because actually that's a red herring, because somebody with ADHD equally can suffer hugely with anxieties. They may not show that on the forefront, but actually the things that are manifesting within them are driving them to be thinking about and have a hyper focus or a hyper attention on something completely different to what actually you want them to focus on. And just having that understanding and awareness, it makes us then start to think about the environments that we're creating and that culture of behaviours that can then kind of pull out different responses within the workplace. We have to think about that now. We can't kind of shy away from that. And businesses are doing that really well. They're talking about it so much more. And they're doing that not just by singling out neurodivergent people. They're thinking about, as I say, the collective agenda around inclusion.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think I speak to a lot of, as you know, coming on the podcast, speak to a lot of really, really inspiring HR leaders, HR thinkers. And so one of the things that I often leave a podcast thinking is sometimes the scale of complexity of inclusion feels quite overwhelming. And just to add a bit of flesh on that, you've got to build an inclusive environment that caters for people from a whole range of different backgrounds, be it social or their ethnicity or what country they come from or how they think. And sometimes that can, I think, when I'm thinking about this from a problem statement perspective, it almost feels overwhelming because I'm thinking, well, how can you make a culture that is inclusive to absolutely everyone? But so I'd love to get your thoughts on how to. Often a lot of the audience come from very lean HR functions, so they're not a Barclays with a giant HR function. How can you cater for so many people?
It's really interesting you say about it being quite overwhelming for us sitting here thinking about all of the different things that we've in the last kind of 15 minutes we've just spoken about. Day to day, that's what people with neurodiversity feel. That is they wake up and they need to choose what to wear just to go outside, and that overwhelmingness can really take over somebody. Equally, as HR professionals, the agenda that we have to deliver against can be really, really overwhelming. And as we've kind of seen the spotlight on the profession grow and grow and grow, that overwhelmingness, actually, there's a higher risk of overwhelmingness. How have we dealt with that, and what our business is doing to kind of manage that, I guess, is they're breaking it down and thinking about the different pieces of the puzzle. And when you talk about culture and you talk about, creating an environment within a workplace, you might be a team of 2 in an organisation of 200, 350, whatever that is. The number of different personalities, the number of different things that we're kind of dealing with, it doesn't change. It just scales. It scales from the number of people you might have in an organisation of 250,000 people to your smaller startup business. Do we have to think differently? Yeah, we do have to think about the solutions might be different because they have to be scalable, as I say. But the biggest thing, I think, is about listening and being very much aware that this is something that's happening to people. And it's not about corporate businesses being the Mother Teresa, okay? It's not about taking the professionals within our NHS and taking their jobs and becoming counsellors. It's about creating an environment where we can help resonate the stories of individuals, that they can come and bring that whole self into work. And again, those statements feel quite cliche because we've heard that for a long, long time. We're equipping managers, our C-suite, all the way down to people on the ground to really kind of understand and build their toolkit, build strategies for themselves, coping mechanisms. When somebody walks into a room and you're literally doing a catch-up with somebody and they're coming in with a whole new problem that you weren't ready for, it's helping people to deal with those things. And it goes beyond not just people managers, but colleagues. You as a person, it's a little bit like the analogy of a pilot and his passengers on a plane. Why do we have the blinds up on the windows? Because there are more people that can see out of the plane. So basically, if all those people see something happening and he's looking out the front of the plane, we can still get the messages back in to the pilot. Think of it like that. So you've got all of these people on the ground hearing messages, watching behaviours, thinking about things that are happening all around them on a day-to-day basis. We need to equip people to really be able to make that response and to come back in and tell the pilot what direction we need to course correct.
Is that actually why?
That is actually the reason why.
And that's why we have the...
Yes, that's actually why you have the...
Oh, now I feel a real sense of responsibility next time. That is amazing. And actually, you know what? I absolutely love that. And I think maybe the answer to, it feels like there's infinite complexity is, in whatever scale of organisation you have, if you've got a 250 person team, you've got 250 people in the organisation, you've got 49 people who can help you to build an inclusive workplace. And I think we're just, we're having this conversation at Instant Impact at the moment, which is, we always want to be, we're a business that's scaling. We're soon to break the 100 person mark. And our question is, how do we maintain our focus on inclusion when we're getting bigger and, the whole culture piece as well? And the answer really, when you get to a certain size, it can't be in policies and in processes. It's got to be in culture and in the team and pushing that responsibility out. That's what it feels like anyway.
Yeah, and really kind of define your mission and your values. I'm doing a consultancy gig at the moment, and I'm working for an absolutely phenomenal organisation, and they are scaling. They are absolutely scaling. But the thing that they have not lost is why they do what they do, what the mission is, but also what their values are. And their leadership team really do lead from the front in living those values. And I think as you scale, being able to really feel those values, having worked in very large organisations and smaller organisations, it's always been the thing that I think I've always anchored to. Why am I here? What am I doing? What's the purpose for me? And what's the role that I play? And then when you think about the cultural aspects of that, as an employee, you might be there managing a day-to-day risk for the business. You might be there building business development, going out, speaking to clients, etc. We have a responsibility to each other, just as human beings, but equally to a business. And in business, if you can kind of almost bring all of those things together, bring your corporate responsibility together with the human aspect, and not lose that human aspect to your business as you keep scaling, I think that is the powerful piece of any puzzle. And actually, probably even more important as we move into an era where technology is going to become extremely the largest focal point.
And I think I so agree with you. I think with that focus on AI in particular, it just has to come every minute you spend thinking about AI, you should be thinking about the human impact and the human element as well, because it really does feel like that piece is going to be the key differentiator between organizations.
And I recently spoke with and heard from somebody else in our profession, and they made a statement that AI is not going to take our jobs away, right? It's going to create new opportunities. It's going to create other ways of working. We can't be frightened of it. But actually, just don't forget that we're humans, and there will always be a place for humans in the world. It's just what we want to create as that kind of purpose for us. And I think if we do that really well, then we can kind of continue to build that culture where technology becomes complementary to what we do as humans. Technology is the thing, actually, that for my neurodivergent 9-year-old daughter is life-changing. She is reading books, but she doesn't actually have to read books anymore. She can listen to them, and you, being a dyslexic as well, probably love
big audiobook fan.
Yeah, probably love that. And it's just those type of things that we have to really think about what's going to impact. And we talked about the opportunities. So thinking about what opportunities it creates, being neurodiverse, having that neurodivergent thinking, even as businesses, just being more inclusive. The complement between AI, tech, digital, that whole kind of strategic agenda, and piece that together with neurodiversity and inclusion as a whole, you almost have an oracle of success right there if we can get it right.
I so agree. And I've seen this through the lens of L&D as well, in that, there's all been this shift towards being hyper-personalized. Suddenly it's possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably true in I could see a world where you're going into it would be a continuous improvement meeting, right? Because we're going to get rid of the annual review cycle. So you go into one of those sessions. I could see a world where you have a little AI co-pilot saying, in this session, because Jenny has ADHD, avoid X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Focus on A, B, and C, and use this kind of language to get the most out of this meeting. I mean, that doesn't feel like it's very far away at all, does it?
No, it doesn't. And actually, that potential is it's actually a little bit frightening for somebody like me. Because when I look at my 3 neurodivergent people in my household, although you could kind of script, right, you know, you have OCD, so we will steer clear of this type of language. You have ADHD, so we'll steer clear of that type of language, and we'll focus much more around, you know, X, Y, and Z. It still needs the human piece, because you can use your AI and technology for guidance, structure, frameworks, best practice. You have to overlay that individual side of context, the background. Some of that language on that piece of paper might not work for, say, you know, one person versus the next, because they may have different triggers. And neurodiversity really does have those trigger points. It can't be underestimated what the different triggers will trigger a different conversation around a table. When you think about one-on-one meeting, really easy to manage, right? When you think about a team meeting, a workshop, some creativity sessions, you might have an ideation session where everyone's around the table, you know, you've got a problem statement, you need to solve a problem, you're a group of technicians or relationship managers, whoever you are, HR professionals, it doesn't matter. I think of a scenario with my little girl in her classroom, and she described one day where she has about 6 or 7 neurodivergent kids in her class. And from one conversation happening, the spiral of conversation that then went round the whole room and actually didn't give the outcome that anyone probably intended. And it was one of them getting upset because obviously, you know, they're small, 8, 9. They don't necessarily interpret or understand all of the things. We hopefully won't have that in a meeting room, but let's say we do, right? Because it can happen. Those triggers will need to be managed. And what's really important with this and us being successful and building a world of work where we can really capitalize on all of these different kind of things that are happening in people's minds is awareness and the toolkit. So I come back to the toolkit all of the time and building that capability, thinking about, when we're thinking about the skills agenda now, let's think about the skills that not only monetize the product, but helps us capitalize on the talent that we have. And that can monetize, right? That can automatically create savings, it can create efficiencies, it can create a competitive advantage. But we have to think about that as we're starting to think about the parts of our people agenda that are evolving. So the skills agenda is a big topical space right now. How do we define a skills-powered organisation? How do we capitalise on that? How do we get the best out of that? And it's thinking about things at the outset. For small, medium-sized organisations who have been around for a long time, they might have established processes and protocols. It will be more challenging for them to kind of unwind or integrate and embed things because it's existing. We have got millions of dollars, billions of dollars, particularly in the UK, that's being invested in startup organisations. That is a huge opportunity for us to create a different workplace. A workplace where we, at the outset of that journey, already think about inclusion. So your example, where you guys are already kind of almost at 100, nearly 100 people. Wow, you know, when you were kind of sitting back and you had 10 of you sitting around a table, you probably weren't thinking about you and your dyslexia and what that was going to kind of mean. But when you start getting 100 people, you're then kind of saying, okay, well, that's probably a third of you who are neurodivergent in one way or another. Or let's say 1 in 7, right? So slightly bigger percentage. It just starts to mean that you're framing your people agenda and thinking about your culture in a slightly different way, because you've got blank canvases, and where we can influence the blank canvas, let's do that in the right way.
It is so much easier than I mean, a few of our clients have been around for, well, a couple of them have been around for hundreds of years, You're right, it's that is a bit more of an oil tanker to turn. Although, I mean, we definitely think the HR people that we work with are almost to a person having great success in if they're in another organisation, changing that. So with the right leadership, you can really have an impact. But you're right, it is easier. It is easier for the smaller, sort of newer organisations as well.
And also because with newer organisations, if you come back to the technology era that we're in, you haven't got the complexities of an infrastructure that is already kind of built in, established. You can really think about the type of technologies that you're using and how that can kind of benefit your business and the people doing those particular roles, and how it can kind of, again, complement the two things. When we signed our deals years ago, firms who have been around for 50 to 100 years, they're in agreements, they're in contracts. That is the practical side of business. We've signed documents that keep us tied in for a long period of time. So it's not so easy to move the Titanic, right? We have to think about what those kind of course corrections are. And I guess we kind of revert back to the smaller, mid-sized organisations, but thinking about those kind of small course corrections that can then lead to embedding that kind of bigger course correction, the directional change. And if you can, and if, I guess, leadership have that right mindset, and you made the point about having the right leadership, and I think that is so, so important. If you've got those people who are actually driving the culture through your organisation, and they set that tone from the top, it absolutely is an unquestionable impact on everybody else around them. They feel it. And I think not being frightened as leaders to have that level of impact is really, really important.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I just looked at the time. I can't believe it, Louise, but we've run out. But this has been a really fascinating conversation, and it's an important, absolutely critical topic. So thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for being so transparent, and thanks for such a thought-provoking half hour.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.